All right. Hey, here we are. This is Brian Winter from Forever 11, and we are here doing part 5 of a 6-part series that we've started called The Art of Good Storytelling. Um, and I'm here with my good friend David, who is signing on right now. David, are you there? Uh, Yeah, there you are. There you are. Cool, cool. Well, hey, super excited to be continuing with our series here on storytelling. But before we jump in, how you doing, David? It's been a little while.
Yeah, I'm doing great. I'm doing great. It's been a great week and lots going on in the news with Web3 and AI, and the world keeps turning. So it's always nice to hop on here and take a little bit of a break and talk about the fun stuff, you know?
Yeah, definitely, definitely. Well, I mean, we don't need to dive deep into it, but I'm right there with you. I feel like just a little bit more and more. I feel like there's a little bit more positive news coming out, like in general about everything Web3, crypto. I'm just seeing all sorts of. I just read an article today talking about further use cases for NFTs, related to like stock certificates and tracking shares. And I was like, oh, this is just great. I'm just glad to see that, the seeds are being planted in many, many areas in the Web3 space. So it's all really cool.
Absolutely. It's all coming together, all multiple industries.
Yeah, yeah, awesome. Well, hey, so we're here to continue to talk about storytelling, right? We've covered so much ground already in this 6-part series. We've talked about plot, setting, characters, and today we're talking about point of view. And at first, when you think about storytelling, like when I first looked at like these 5 things we're going to be talking about with storytelling, I was kind of like, all right, well, I mean, I think plot, characters, I mean, those are probably going to be like the most important ones. And I was like, point of view. I'm like, well, I mean, I'm sure it's important, but I initially processed it as it's kind of maybe kind of low on the list. But as it relates, especially to in our context, which I'll define our context as artists that want to tell their story with, I'll say, a pretty explicit goal of their audience, which could be buyers, could be followers, could be friends and family. They have a goal most likely to build a bond and have people feel endeared to them and their endeavors and their goals as an artist. Because if they do, we know, David, we've been talking about, there's a much higher propensity for you to be able to sell your art, which is a goal, I would say, for most artists. If your audience is like, man, like this is like a cool person and they've got a great story, and the stories behind why and how they created their art is just amazing. Like that just helps you sell art.
Absolutely. No, you're absolutely right.
Yeah. So, David, are you a big Star Wars fan, or just like I mean, I've seen the movies, I know a little bit about them, or where do you fall in that
I,
spectrum?
I'm like, yeah, I would say I'm a fan. I appreciate it. My oldest friend has arguably the largest toy collection from Star Wars.
Oh,
But I did go to the opening days of the new release, the more recent
yeah.
releases. But yeah, so I know a
Okay.
little bit about it. Yeah.
Okay. So then, Star Wars, well, when we use the term trilogies, we're talking about threes. And I would say Star Wars was released as like 3 sets or 3 actual trilogies. Um, First, second, or third, what was the first trilogy that came out in the 70s of the Star Wars series?
I don't. Can you
Oh,
reframe the
okay.
question?
Yeah, okay. So, the story.
That was 4, 5, and 6,
Yeah,
right?
okay. Yeah. Okay. So, yeah, right. And it's kind of weird the way that I'm phrasing it, but you are, yep, you're exactly right. So I'm kind of defining that as like
Yeah.
it was actually like the second trilogy, if you will,
that
was released.
There's a sequel trilogy.
Right, exactly, right. And then from there, they went and continued the story into what I would argue is the third trilogy. So they went and, told us like 7, 8, and 9. Actually, no, we didn't. We went
prequel.
Yeah, we did go prequel. Okay, yeah. You know what? Well, geez, my whole setup for how I was going to introduce point of view just totally flopped on its face. But actually, it didn't, because we're gonna do it this way. Where I was going with this is there are 3 points of view: first person, second person, and third person. Now, what's still true to how I was going to set this up is I was going to start right smack in the middle, and I'm still going to do that with second person. And here's why I'm going to do that is I'm going to start with what I think pertains the least to our audience, and that is the second person. Second person, when we speak in second person, we're addressing our audience directly. So we're talking like directly at them. So it's really, although we don't really typically use it, we're really talking in what I would call you statements, as in like YOU, like, hey, you, I've got something to tell you personally. And we use this extensively in marketing, right? So many, whether they're television, radio commercials, billboards, magazine ads, online ads, it's all implicit that the message is kind of saying, hey, do you suffer from back and neck pain? Or, are you looking for the most off-road worthy vehicle? This is it. So those are all delivered in you statements. But we're really wanting to tell our story as an artist and about our art. But I don't know, you can tell me, David, but I don't really see an application of where I need to say, hey, you, this is what you need to know, or this is what you should do, or whatever, when I'm really just trying to talk about myself and my art. But I don't really see anything.
Yeah, I mean, I think if anything, it just allows room for creativity and you want to be different. Mm-hmm. But I think fundamentally, it's going to be important to just, get comfortable with the more basic approach of just telling it directly from yourself. But that does leave room moving forward on being able to expand the narrative and the version in which you're able to tell, for sure.
Well, and maybe because, I always love a good challenge, and maybe some of our listeners do too. Maybe somebody will surprise us on Forever 11 and figure out a way in the second person to tell an amazing story, about their art or something. And then we'll be like, oh my gosh, look at that. We'll feature it or something and be like, love the use of second person there. But so, all right, next, let's move on to third person. Third person, I can definitely see this being now moving into the realm of a lot more applicable. Third person is we're using pronouns like he, she, they. So this is really funny. In my household, I don't know why I do this, but my family's called me out on it, and they're like, Dad, that is like so weird that you do that. But for whatever reason, sometimes I will just start referring to myself in the third person. Like I'll just be like, hey guys, Dad's getting hungry over here, and they're like, Dad, why don't you just say I'm hungry? I'm like, well, I don't know. It just kind of sounded cool if I was referencing myself in the third person. Yeah,
it's way better. Way better.
So it might sound, I can appreciate how my kids are like, Dad, that's a little weird, when you're talking to me, but this absolutely could be a really effective way to tell a story when you're wanting to like write a profile for yourself. And maybe you want to, refer to yourself like, hey, here's Brian Winter. He is an accomplished artist, hailing from Detroit, Michigan. His background started out and blah, 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 and that doesn't seem or feel weird because we see it all the time. And so that can be a really effective point of view to reference. But The one that I like the most, and this is the one that I've saved for the end, is first person. First person, this is all about I statements, right? So your bio as an artist, if you're writing the first person, probably starts with either, my name is Brian and I blah, 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 or maybe I, fill in the blank. So it's a very personal approach. If it was up to me, that's kind of my preference, because as an artist or as a storyteller, to me, it kind of feels like the most endearing or the most intimate, which in my mind is kind of the goal that we're seeking here when we're trying to help artists tell a really impactful story.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely the go-to. And I would just, yeah, I mean, if you want to venture out and get a little bit of, outside the norm and the elements, you can experiment with other things. I'm trying to run in my head, examples of where we've seen that, at least like in cinema or whatnot. But um, it's always nice to see. It's a little refreshing, but it's certainly something that's difficult, I think, to maintain, as a style,
Mm-hmm.
like always, you know what I
Yeah,
mean?
yeah. Well, like thinking about cinema and stuff, we've referenced it before in a couple of our shows, but there was the series The Wonder Years. And, they kind of did that a little bit, where they kind of did it using like an adult narrator who was telling the story, but he was telling the story as you're kind of watching his like childhood character, I think, a little bit. Um, but that narrator was saying, oh, well, I, blah, 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 blah. And so we saw that a little bit. But I think
Yeah.
what's unique here is the kind of storytelling and actually, you know what, maybe this is an epiphany here, is really the type of storytelling that we're telling here, for the most part, really isn't fiction based. I mean, this is more biographical, or really autographical, where we are telling this really deep personal story about ourselves. And and maybe that is really significant, the fact that it is coming from ourselves. But
Which makes it, I mean, which adds that uniqueness to
Mhm.
it, that it's just so genuine. That's what we want. Sort of a memoir, or you know, I've always taken note of the differences and the nuances between an autobiography and a biography or whatnot, and you can make a case here or there where the actual biographies were better than the autobiographies, because you know having to sift through your own life, but being able to frame it into the right perspective is something that is, should not be underestimated as to how difficult that can be,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sure. So I see Susan came on to request to speak. Susan, did you have something to add here?
Well, yeah, I did. I'll just introduce myself. I spoke in one of the previous episodes, but I am your wife,
Mm-hmm.
and together, you and I also run a curriculum business, and we've given this a lot of attention, because when we're writing marketing materials, are we writing to a parent? Are we writing to a teacher? Are we writing to a student?
Mm-hmm.
And so one of the things that really we've come down to is what's our global intention. When we're writing our curriculum, we've made the conscious decision to write that in first person, so that the student feels like we're just sitting down next to them and talking to them, like we're having a conversation in a coffee shop, and exchanging some meaningful ideas. So I think the goal with point of view is really getting clear on the intention. Are you trying to develop a relationship with your audience? Are you wanting to be vulnerable, or are you wanting this to be a little more formal? And then the point of view flows naturally from that.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're right that in terms of curriculum, we found, in fact, we've literally gotten this feedback uh, from teachers that have used the curriculum with the students, and they've literally told us, our students really seem to identify with that, because the way when you're talking in the first person, and we've literally told like personal stories of when we were in school as students, or sometimes when we were in school as classroom teachers as well. But when since we were talking from the first person point of view, that the students felt like, oh, well, like these people that are trying to teach me something, you know what, they also know my pain, or they've also been in a similar spot, or they can at least sympathize with what I'm going through, versus some other curriculums we've heard from teachers are like, well, it's just really like academic, and it's kind of sterile, and it just seems like it's talking at
the exactly.
students.
It's talking at versus talking with.
Right.
And
yeah, exactly.
That's determined by point of view, for sure. Mm-hmm. Or the point of view is how you execute one of those two paths.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So, well, this has been great. Unless anybody else has anything to add on point of view, I mean, I think we've covered it. It is probably one of the more simple forms or story elements to storytelling is what I'm trying to say. But nonetheless important. And that means we're just about done here, but join us next week, next Monday, for our last episode, which will be on conflict. And I'm really looking forward to that one. I think it's going to be a fun one. But, well, David,
always,
Susan.
Conflict's always fun.
Yeah. David, Susan, thank you so much for joining me and all of our great listeners, and we'll see you next time.
Have a good one. Take care, everyone.